Reality is fragile. Layers of code, history, and perception. What happens when one of those layers split? Welcome to Glitch Reality. Tonight's story takes us somewhere ancient, somewhere vast, somewhere that does not need to answer back. The Amazon rainforest is often described as a place, a location on a map, a stretch of green seen from above, a resource, a miracle, a problem yet to be managed. But what if that is the first mistake? What if the roots beneath the soil carried more than just water? What if the insects, the trees, the fungi, the rivers, and even the predators were not separate things living beside each other, but one piece of an enormous body? And what happens when you cut into that body? Well, tonight we find out. We follow Dr. Adrian Keller, a scientist sent deep into the Amazon rainforest to investigate a failed project only known as Line Eden. It was supposed to repair the damaged land. It was supposed to accelerate recovery. It was supposed to prove that humanity could control the healing process. But some things never heal clearly. Some bodies reject medicine, and some wounds do not close, and some even grow teeth. This is the Breathing Green. The first transmission came through at 3:17 a.m. Not local time, not company time, not the time listed on any official report. The details would become important later, because according to emergency logs, the crew working on the pipeline section 12, should have finished their installation 6 hours before that distress signal. They were not supposed to even be there anymore. At least, that was the version Helix Terra gave publicly. A maintenance delay, an unexpected pressure issue, a minor fault in the line. The sort of language corporations use when people you know are already dead. The pipeline had a name: the Line to Eden. Officially, it was one of the most ambitious ecological restoration projects ever attempted. A buried delivery system stretching through scarred sections of the Amazon rainforest, designed to release a bio-regenerative compound into damaged soil. The investors called it controlled recovery. The scientists called it excelled restoration. The press called it a miracle. And the local workers just called it the pipe. And on the night of the first section rupture, 4 of them were still out in the jungle, waist-deep in mud, rain hammering against their helmets, floodlights buzzing above them, or insects threw themselves at glass. The recording from that night was never meant to survive, but it did. At first, there is only static. Then rain. Then a man laughing tiredly. Tell the miracle people that the pipe is leaking. But you hear another man as well, now further away. It's not leaking. Pressure valve's just jammed. You hear a metal clank in the distance. Something scrapes. A third voice mutters in Portuguese, too low to translate. Then one of the workers swears. The floodlight flickers. For several seconds, the audio starts to distort. Not with static, but with something lower. Wet. Rhythmic. like air being pushed through a throat. One of the workers turns in a quiet voice and says, Can you hear that? Nobody answers straight away. Then, it's coming from inside the line. Another scrape. Boots shifting in mud. A tool getting dropped into water. Someone breathing too close to the microphone. The rain almost seems to stop. Not quite stop, but soften. As if the jungle around them had now swallowed sound. One of the workers now very quietly says, Why have all the birds stopped? The jungle was not angry. Not yet. It was quiet. This is when the screaming begins. It is not just one scream, it is several things happening at once. A floodlight shatters. Someone yells for a machete. Another man screams that something is under his gloves. Metal's banging against metal. A chainsaw starts to roar for half a second and then stops. Then the first voice, the one that joked about the miracle pipe, comes back over to the transmission, but he is no longer laughing. There's something in the trench. A wet impact rings out, a choking sound. Then another voice, closer now, almost inside the microphone. It's in the pipe. It's in the pipe. The breathing noise grows louder. The workers are running. You can hear branches breaking. You hear someone fall, and you hear the slick drag of something being pulled through mud. And then at the very end of the recording, one man remains. He is crawling, because you can tell by the sound. The microphone scraping against soil and leaves. His breathing comes in, broken, panic bursts. Behind him, something clicks. Not like one insect, like hundreds of insects, trying to make some sound at the same time. So the man drags himself slower and slower to the transmission. For a moment, the audio clears, and he says, It is not a leak. He takes a wet, trembling inhale. It is a vein. And then he screams out in pain and terror, and the transmission cuts out. And for 8 seconds after the scream ends, the recording continues. No voices, no rain, no machinery. Just the jungle, breathing. Dr. Adrian Keller watched the recording 17 times before he even said a word. Not because he was shocked. Shock would have meant he did not understand what he was seeing. But he understood enough. That was the problem. The emergency response room at Helix Terra South Operations Facility was cold, white, and built to look calm. Glass walls, soft lighting, screens mounted in perfect lines across the far side of the room. One of those screens showed a frozen image from the final few seconds of the pipeline crew's helmet. Mud, a gloved hand, a section of exposed pipe, and something green, blackish leaking from the seam. It should have been liquid. It did not look like liquid. It almost looked as if the pipe was bleeding. Around the table sat 6 people who had spent their careers learning how to make disasters sound only temporary. Operations directors, legal advisors, security consultants, and 2 people from communications. And Keller, the man who helped design the compound. Project Verdant had been his life for 11 years. He stood on conference stages and promised that ecologically recovery no longer has to take generations. Damaged soil could be revived. Root systems reconnected. Stripped lands restored. He had used words like regeneration, recovery, healing. He had never once used the word mutation. Not publicly. Privately, there had been anomalies. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could not be explained away in a report. Insects clustering during Trial 4. Fungal overexertion during Trial 6. Rot aggression in sealed soil chambers. One test sample where a damaged plant simply did not repair its tissue, but grew around the blade that had cut it. Keller had called them acceptable deviations. He had written that phrase himself. Acceptable deviations. 2 words that could almost bury anything. Operations Director Myron Holt paused the footage on the green-black leak and turned to him. Keller, could this be a contamination event? Keller responds in almost a restrained way. It depends what you mean by contamination. I mean, could the compound have reacted with something in the soil? Well, yes. And the room waited, and Keller swallows. But it should not happen at this speed. This was the first honest thing that anyone had said in that room. The second came from a junior technician seated near the back. We also received movement data from Section 12 before the signal died. What kind of movement? Replied Holt. The technician brought it up on another screen. A map of the pipeline route appeared. A red marker pulsed where the crew had been stationed. There was more markers around it. Small at first, then hundreds, then thousands. They moved in from surrounding forests, converging on the leak. The communications director now leaned forward. Animals? The technician did not answer immediately. The markers continued to gather. Then, in a near-perfect ring around pipeline section 12, they stopped. Keller felt something cold move through him. Not fear, but recognition. In the laboratory, the compound had stimulated networks. Roots, fungi, bacteria. Small systems talking to one another through chemical signals. But the Amazon was not a laboratory tray. The Amazon did not contain one root, or one fungal, or one sample. It contained so much life. Layered, hungry, connected, and unmeasured. Keller stared at the ring of the movement markers. The jungle had not run from the leak. It had gathered around it. Holt, in a cold tone, now replies, "We need confirmation before this becomes public." And the original crew recovered, if possible. And now communications speaks. We also need footage, controlled footage. We need everything. We cannot let a constructed stress signal arrive and define this narrative. Keller, in a scared voice, now responds, "You want to send people there?" Holt, keeping everything as straight as he can. We are sending a controlled investigation team, security, medical, technical support, and a documentary unit. A documentary unit? Keller replies in disbelief. Project Verdant was meant to be present at the Zurich summit in 12 days' time. The board still wants visual documentation. Keller almost laughs. 4 men were dead in the mud, and somewhere in Zurich a room full of people were waiting to watch a miracle. But Holt continues. Keller, you will go with them. Why? Because this is your compound, Doctor. You're the only person who might understand what is actually going on. Keller wanted to correct. He wanted to say the compound was not doing anything. Compounds react. Systems adapt. Living things choose. But instead, he said in a quieter tone, when does the helicopter leave? First light. Make sure you're on it. The helicopter set them down in a clearing that had been cut into the rainforest years before, back when Eden Line was still being surveyed. From above, the Amazon rainforest looked endless. That was the first thing Keller noticed every time he flew over. Not beautiful, endless. A green body without edges. The canopy rolled beneath them in waves, broken only by the occasional brown scar of exposed earth or the silver thread of river water. Beside him, documentarian presenter Mara Ellison pressed her camera team forward for one more establishing shot. Get the pipeline route if you can, then the canopy, then Keller looking thoughtful. Keller responds in a dry tone. Please don't. You are thoughtful, Doctor. I'm tired. Even better. The team consisted of 7 people. Keller, lead ecological system architect for Project Verdant. Mara Elson, presenter and public face of the documentary crew. Leah Marsh, camera operator. Benji Rees, drone technician and sound recordist. Anna Cortez, medic. And Rurik, a private security escort. And Thomas Ibarro, a local guide. Thomas was the only one who did not seem impressed by the helicopter, the equipment, the money, or even the mission. He watched the tree line as they landed. Not casually, but carefully. Almost as if he expected the forest to react. When Keller stepped down into the clearing, the heat hit him like a hand over his mouth. Wet air, rotting leaves, and warm mud. Something flowering too sweetly somewhere nearby. The helicopter pilot handed Rourke a smartphone and shouted over. 72 hours, same clearing, dawn of the 3rd day. Rourke responds. Radio checks. Every 6 hours, if we lose contact, the extraction will still happen 72 hours. Keller looking out at the tree lines. It was only 10 meters away. A wall of green. And then the helicopter lifted, wisping loose leaves into the air. For a few seconds, the noise swallowed everything. Then the aircraft rose above the canopy and turned west. The sound faded, the leaves settled, and the rainforest closed in around them. Benji now speaks in an uneasy tone. Is it always this quiet here? Thomas did not answer straight away, but then he said, no. And then Mara tries to capture it on camera, trying to lighten the mood. That's creepy. Say it again to the camera. so Thomas just looks towards her. No. Nobody laughs. They begin walking towards Section 12 just after sunrise. At first, the route was easy enough. Old survey tape still hung from branches. The pipeline's access path had been cut 2 years earlier, though the jungle had already begun to reclaim the path. Vines crossed the trail. Roots pushed through the soil like knuckles. Insects droned from somewhere unseen. 2 hours into the walk, Leia stops. Hold up. She crouches beside the tree and points the camera at the trunk. At first, Keller sees nothing unusual. But then the bark begins to move. A spider, roughly the size of his palm, crawled out from a split in the wood. And Mara whispers in a low tone, "That is disgusting." "Rourke, it's just a spider." Keller stepped closer. "No, it isn't." The spider's body was glossy and dark, its abdomen swollen with faint green lines pulsing beneath the surface. Its legs were too long for its body, joints sharply, ending not in fine tips, but in tiny hooked claws that clicked softly against the bark. Its fangs protruded sideways, too large to fit cleanly in its mouthparts. It looked less like a new species and more like a mistake the jungle had decided to keep. It did not flee though. It sat on that tree, and it watched them. Thomas murmured something under his breath. Keller crouched down to spite himself. "Adaptive overdevelopment." "English," Hannah responds. "It can change faster than its body can organize." The spider lifted one leg. Not towards Keller, but towards the camera. Leia took a step back. Then the tree line behind it shifted. More spiders emerged from the bark. Dozens. Not attacking, just watching. Rourke raises his rifle. Thomas puts a hand on the barrel and slowly pushes it down. "No." Rourke responds to Thomas. "They're spiders." And Thomas looks in towards the trees. No. They are listening. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the spiders turned, all at once, and disappeared, slowly, back into the woods. As they kept on with their expedition, they reached Pipeline Section 12 just before dusk. The smell arrived first. Not death, exactly. Death was simpler. This was rot mixed with wet soil, chemical sweetness, and something metallic that clung to the back of your throat. The site looked abandoned in the way battlefields look abandoned. Tools laid in the mud, floodlights leaned at broken angles, and a generator sat silently beneath a sheet of rainwater. The trench had partially collapsed around the exposed section of the pipe, and the pipe itself was still leaking. Slowly. A green-black fluid pulsed from the rupture in thick, irregular beats. Keller stared at it. The timing was wrong though. It should have been pressured. It shouldn't look like a pulse. Benji cries out in a quiet tone, "Do you hear that?" But nobody answers, because they all heard it. The pipe was breathing. Rourke found the first body beside the trench. He did not call out at first. He simply stopped walking. His rifle lowered an inch, then rose again, as if his hands could not decide whether what he was seeing was already dead or still dangerous. Medic! Anna moved past Keller and crouched near the trench wall. The worker was sitting upright in the mud, or what was left of him was. His back rested against the collapsed bank of the trench, legs stretched out in front of him, boots half submerged in brown water. His orange reflective jacket was still zipped almost to his throat. His helmet had slipped forward, covering his eyes like someone who had tried to spare himself the sight of what had happened. For one short, merciful second, Keller thought the man had simply died sitting up. But then the jacket moved. Not much, but just a small ripple beneath the material. Then another. Then a slow, shifting bulge travelled from the man's stomach upwards towards his chest, and through something underneath the jacket had rolled over in its sleep. Anna froze, and Mara whispered, "Is he alive?" But no one answered. Anna reached for the zip, but Keller had warned not to do that. He knew with absolute certainty, animal certainty, that whatever was beneath the jacket should remain hidden. But she pulled the zip down anyway. The sound was horribly loud in the silence. The jacket opened. Mara made a small choking noise behind him. The man's chest was emptied. Not ripped open in a messy violence of predator feeling. Not torn apart by claws or teeth. Emptied. His sternum had been cracked down the center and pulled outward. His ribs stood exposed in pale, curved arcs like the frames of a broken cage. The skin around the wound had dried and tightened into ragged strips, but inside the cavity there was no heart, no lung, no soft organs left to recognize. There was only movement. Ants. Thousands of them. They filled from his pelvis to his throat, a dense, black, glistening mass pouring over the bone and ligament, moving in streams so organized that Keller's mind rebelled against the sight. They had not merely eaten him, they had occupied him. The man's ribcage had become horticulture. His spine was a central column. His ribs were chambers. The hollow beneath his collarbone had been packed with pale eggs clustered together like grains of wet rice. A line of ants moved in and out from his mouth, using the slack tunnel of his throat as an entrance. Some carried scraps of red tissue. Some carried fragments of leaf. Some carried larvae. Soft and white, curled like commas between their jaws. Anna covered her nose with the back of her wrist because she did not look away. The smell was thick enough to taste. Rot. Iron. Mud. A sour chemical sweetness from the leaking pipe, and underneath it all, the hot, oily stink of insects. The worker's face, though, was almost untouched. That was somehow worse. His cheeks had slightly sunken. His lips were split at the corners. Dried blood marked the lines between his nose and his ears, where the ants had forced entry before the body had opened. His mouth hung loose, the tongue swollen and dark. Then the tongue moved. Mara gagged, because the tongue was not moving by itself. Something was underneath it. A black line of ants pushed up from the throat, lifting the tongue in a slow, obscene wave. They emerged between his teeth and spilled out over his lower lip, dropping one by one onto the exposed ribs below. Benji could not take it, and he says in a hushed tone, "Jesus Christ, what has happened here?" Anna lifts her torch slightly. the beam enters the chest cavity, and all of a sudden, the ants stopped. All of them. For 1 second, the entire colony froze inside this dead man. Then slowly, every ant visible in the cavity turned towards the light. Not scattering, not panicking, turning. Thousands of tiny heads angled upwards in the same direction, looking at them. The worker's chest cavity clicked. Once. Then again. Then hundreds of times, layered together, mandibles striking in a dry, delicate rhythm. Click. Click, click. Click. Benji raised his recorder without seeming to realize what he was doing. They're making the sound from the transmission. Thomas steps back from the body. His face had gone grey. No, Thomas swallows. Keller looks at him. They are practicing it. The ants click again. This time, the rhythm almost sounds like breathing. From the exposed pipe behind them, the green-black liquid pulsed, and the body answered. They found the second body hung in the canopy. They found him because one of his boots had fell. It landed beside Leah with a wet thud. She screamed, looked up, and dropped her camera. The foreman was suspended between two trees, wrapped in layers of webbing so thick it looked like rope. His arms were stretched outward. His legs were bent behind him. His hard hat was still strapped beneath his chin, but the visor had been cracked from the inside out. Rourke aimed his rifle upward. What did that? But nobody answered. That webbing was not normal silk. It also pulsed faintly. Anna cut a sample loose with a scalpel she had found, and green-black fluid seemed to leak from the strand. She flinched. It's vascular. What? It has vessels. The webbing around the foreman's torso tightened slightly. Mara now backs away. He's dead, right? But Anna did not answer. That was answer enough. The third worker was inside the pipe. They only found him because he knocked. 3 dull taps. Then silence. Then 3 again. Rourke backed away from the exposed section of the line and raises his rifle. That came from inside. Anna stared at the pipe. Impossible. But the sound came again. Tap. 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 Not random. Weak. Human. For one insane moment, hope moved through the whole group. Someone was alive. Rourke and Thomas cut open the maintenance panel with Keller stood behind them, with his hands clenched so tightly his nails were digging into his palms. The bolts came loose one by one. The panel dropped into the mud, and the smell rolled out everywhere. Mara turned away before she even saw it inside. Rourke swore and stumbled back. The worker had been forced into the pipeline. Not placed, but forced. His body had been folded through the narrow access space in a way no living thing's body should have fit. His knees had been driven up against his chest. His shoulders were dislocated and pushed inwards. One arm was twisted behind his head, the fingers bent backwards until they resisted against the base of his skull. His spine had not been broken cleanly. It was curved, bent into the pipe's shape, as if something had dragged him inside while the compound softened the rules of what his body could survive. His face turned towards them. One eye was open. The other had been sealed beneath a smooth layer of pale, new tissue, as if skin had grown over it in a hurry and forgotten where the eye was supposed to be. His mouth was stretched wide, jaw locked open. Inside it, the tongue had fused with the lower teeth. Green, black fluid glistened along his gums. Anna whispers, "He should have died instantly." But Keller did not answer, because the worst part was not the broken limbs. It was the healing. Everywhere the body had been damaged, the compound had tried to repair. Badly, desperately. Bones had begun knitting at wrong angles. Torn skin had closed around mud, insects, and splinters of pipe insulation. The fingers on his left hand had fused into a single flattened shape, the nails clustered together like tiny black stones. A broken rib had pushed through the chest wall, then had been sealed there by fresh pink tissue. He had been taken apart and rebuilt incorrectly. The tapping came again. Anna screams. The dead man's hand twitched against the inside of the pipe. Not alive. Not conscious. Just muscles firing beneath new growth trapped in a body still receiving instructions to repair. Tap. 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 Keller steps backwards. His heel sinks into the mud beside the leaking compound. He looked at the folded man in the pipe and understood something that made his stomach turn cold. Project Verdun had not saved him. It had kept the body useful. They should have left that night. But the sat phone failed first. Then the compass. And then the drone. Benji launched it into the sky just above the dark, hoping to get a clean route back. The drone rose above the canopy, camera feed streaming to the tablet in his hands. For 3 seconds, they saw the forest from above. Then nobody spoke. The canopy around Pipeline Section 12 had formed almost a perfect circle. Not a geometric ring, not something that had drawn by a human hand, but close enough that the mind understood it immediately. The leak was the center. The trees all bent inward around it, like tissue pulling a wound. Mara was the first to say something. "Tell me you're recording that." Benji nods. Yeah, I've got it." The feed filled with momentum. A dark cloud burst from the canopy. At first, Keller thought they were just birds. Then one stuck to the drone. The image shook violently. Another hit, then another. Winged insects. Beetles, maybe, or something that had once been a beetle. Their wings were too wet, too new, beating unevenly from their swollen bodies. Their jaws were enlarged. Their legs were barbed. Their shells split open as if the act of growing wings had torn them apart themselves. They did not fly very well. They flew with ugly determination of something that was unfinished. Something that had been given the idea of wings before its body knew how to use them. They slammed into the drone until the feed spun, and Benji shouts, "No, no, no!" The drone falls somewhere east of the pipeline. The last image before the signal died was the canopy below opening up. Not moving, but opening. Benji just stares at the black screen. "That has all our route data on it." Rourke responds, "Just leave it. We need it. Leave it." But Benji had already started heading towards it. That was how the jungle lured him. Not by hate, but by need. He needed the drone, so the jungle used the drone. They found it 20 minutes later, hanging from a low branch in a small clearing, wrapped in a thin veil of webbing. Benji steps forward. "Got it." Thomas catches Keller's arm. "Don't let him touch it." Too late. Benji pulled the drone free. The web snapped and the trees erupt. The winged insects felt like rain. Benji screamed and swung the drone because of them. Rourke fired into the air rapidly. Leia dropped to the ground, covering her head. Mara shouted Benji's name again and again, but the insects did not scatter. They struck with purpose. First the headset, then the camera rig, then the straps of his pack. They were then targeting exposed skin on his wrist. Benji ran blindly through the clearing, and slapping at his face the whole time through. One of the insects forced itself beneath the rim of his goggles. Another one disappeared in his ears so quickly that the only thing its trembling wings remained visible for half a second before they folded in and vanished. A third crawled beneath the skin at the side of his neck, pushing forward into a raised line as if they were swimming underneath of him. "Get them off me!" he starts screaming. But the last words broke apart. His throat was moving a bit wrong. A swelling travelled up from his collarbone, pushing beneath the skin of his neck. His mouth opened wider than it should have. His jaw was trembling, teeth slick with saliva and blood. Anna tried to reach him. Thomas caught her by the wrist and pulled her back. "No. No." Benji looked at Keller. His eyes were still human. That was the worst part. He was still in there. Still aware, still begging. Then his lips parted, and a wing unfolded beneath his teeth, wet, crumpled, and shining. The insect crawled out slowly, dragging itself over his tongue, its body coated in red saliva. It paused on his lower lip, wings twitching as if it was almost testing the air. Then others moved behind it, and then another, and then another. Benji tried to breathe in, and the sound became buzzing. Not outside of him, but inside of him. His chest vibrated. His cheeks swelled as if the force its way was working upward. Rourke fired. Benji's head snapped back and fell into the mud. For 1 second, everything became still. Then his shirt began to move, and 100 tiny shapes crawled beneath the fabric. The jungle was not angry. The jungle was learning. They ran after that. Not far. You cannot run far in the rainforest. Not when the ground sucks at your boots and vines catch your ankles in the air, fills your lung like warm water. By midnight, they had made camp in the old monitoring station, 1/2 kilometer west of the leak. Calling it a station was generous. It was a concrete box with rusted doors and a collapsed storage room and windows filled with algae. Now it was the closest thing they had to shelter. Rourke barricaded the door with a metal table. Leia checked the cameras. Anna cleaned Keller's arm where a spider's hook had sliced during the escape. Mara sat on the floor, shaking, still holding the microphone she had refused to drop. Thomas stood by the window and listened. Keller watched the green, black-like algae beneath the skin. It was faint, almost imaginary. A thin discoloration spread outward from the cut. Anna saw him looking. "We need to clean that properly." "It's nothing. That's what everyone says before it becomes something." Kayla let Anna bandage it. After a while, she says, "Your compound, it heals tissue? It stimulates repair responses. That man in the pipe, was that a repair?" "No." "Then what was that?" Keller opened his eyes. "I don't know." Thomas now speaks from the window. "Yes, you do." Everyone turns. The guide had not moved. He was staring into the dark beyond the glass. "What do you mean, Thomas?" "You gave it instructions." Keller says nothing. Maybe it is following them. Outside, something had brushed against the wall. A soft, dragging touch. Rourke raises his rifle, and the sound comes again. Then from the roof, then from beneath the floor. Leia lifted the camera towards the ceiling. A thin line of webbing pushed through the crack in the concrete. Then another, then 10. Strands were not falling, they were searching. Rourke fires into the ceiling. The sound was deafening inside the station. For a second, nothing had moved. The windows then behind them exploded inward. Snakes poured through the frame, not normal snakes. Their bodies were long, dark and glossy, with green-black seams beneath the scales. Along their sides, tiny malformed limbs protruded in twitching rows, each ending in a hooked claw that scraped against the concrete. They looked unfinished. Looked like evolution had been forced through a broken machine and spat out in pieces. Rourke shouted and fired. One snake burst apart, but 2 more wrapped around his legs. He tried to kick free, but the hooks dug in. Anna grabbed Mara and pulled her towards the rear room. Thomas dragged Leia after, and Keller froze, watching as Rourke became a knot of bodies. The snakes did not bite at first. They anchored him, one around his wrist, one around his leg, and one around his throat. Then something larger pushed through the broken window. It had the head of a snake, but the jaw split too wide, opening into 4 sections. Its body was thick, with irregular muscle, its skin stretched around bones that seemed to grow as it moved. Down its sides, half-formed legs flexed and gripped to the floor. Not enough to walk properly, but enough to hold. Rourke screams, and the smaller snakes tighten. Bones crack, not all at once, but one by one. His wrist, his elbow, then something in his shoulder gives a wet pop. The larger snake closed its mouth around Rourke's shoulder and pulled. The smaller bodies held him in place. For 1 dreadful second, he was stretched between them. His boots scraping, his fingers clawing at the floor, his face red and swollen from the coil around his throat. Then the shoulder tore. Not cleanly. The skin stretched at first, white and tight beneath the blood. Then it split. Blood splayed across the concrete as Rourke's scream collapsed into a thick, choking cough. Keller stumbles backwards, and Rourke's rifle falls from his hands, still attached by the sling. One of the snake's tiny claws limbed inside the trigger guard. The gun clicked. Again, and again. And empty. The last thing Keller saw before Thomas pulled him into the rear room was Rourke's face. Not dead yet, but just understanding enough that bullets did not matter here. The door slammed shut. Something hit it from the other side. Mara was sobbing into her hands. Leah whispers in this room, It's correcting. Keller responds with abject fear. What do you mean? She held up the camera with her shaking fingers. I've been watching the footage. Every time we do something, they change. Fire, light, sound, weapons. They come back different. Anna looks at Keller. That's not mutation. And then Keller responds, it's adaptive response. Thomas nods slowly. The forest is learning you. By dawn, only 5 of them survived. Keller, Mara, Leia, Anna, and Thomas. They left the station through the rear storage room, crawling beneath a collapsed wall while the snakes still moved inside the building. Rourke's rifle lay in the mud outside. The trigger clicked once as they passed. Nobody picked it up. The extraction was 12 kilometers away. The helicopter would return at dawn the next day. That gave them less than 24 hours. They moved fast, but the jungle was moving faster. Paths that had been open the day before were now choked with vines. Survey markers had vanished. The pipeline access trail seemed to bend in the wrong direction whenever they tried to follow it. Leia had kept filming, not because she was brave, but because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. Around midday, she stopped dead. There's someone ahead. Mara turns. What? Leia raises the camera. Through the trees, a figure stood behind 2 trunks. A man in a high-vis jacket, one of the pipeline crew. He hung his head forward, his arms were dragging loosely. Something pale wrapped around his legs. Anna whispers, "That's impossible." The man lifted one hand, slowly beckoning. Mara took a step towards him, and Thomas grabs her shoulder. No. The figure opened its mouth. From inside came Benji's voice. Slightly distorted. Help me. Mara made a sound that was almost a scream. Leia zoomed in. The worker's mouth opened wider. Too wide. Not speaking, but playing. Benji's voice came up again, broken and wet. Help me. Help me. Without a second, the body split. The jacket tore open. Ants, spiders, and pale-winged insects pour from the hollow chest cavity, spilling down the legs into a living black curtain. Leia stumbled backwards. Her foot caught a root, and she fell. The camera flew from her hands and landed facing her. For a second, the footage would later only show leaves and sky. The webbing snapped tight around her ankle, and she screams. Thomas cut the first strand with his machete. 3 more shot from the trees, and they wrapped around her wrist, her waist, and her throat. Not sticky threads, but cords. Muscle, pale, and pulsing. Keller grabs her arm. Anna grabbed the other, and they pulled, but the webbing was pulling back. Leia's camera lay on the ground, still recording as she was dragged towards the trees. Then the spiders appeared, dozens of them pouring down the trunks, each larger than the last, hooked claws sinking into bark, fangs clicking in rhythm. Their bodies were swollen with compound dark pulse. The biggest came last. Not enormous, not impossible. Worse. Believable. The size of a dog, with legs long enough to stand over Leia as she screams. Its abdomen twitched with green veins. Its mouthparts unfold like wet fingers. Anna shouts, "Cut her loose, now!" Thomas is hacking at the webbing. Keller pulled until it felt like something in Leia's shoulder was about to give. And she stopped screaming. Not because she was dead, because one strand had crossed her mouth and tightened. Her eyes found Keller, the spider lowering itself, its fangs touching the side of her neck. The skin starts to dimple, then splits. Her body jerked as venom enters. Her eyes are open, wide, accusing, terrified. The tree shivers, and the webbing pulls her up, fast. Keller falls backwards into the mud. Leia vanishes into the canopy, and for 3 seconds, they hear above them a muffled, strangled cry. Then a wet, tearing sound. Then silence. Her camera light flickered on the ground. High in the branches, every spider turned toward it. Anna was bitten before sunset. She did not tell them at first, though. Keller noticed because she stopped using her left hand. Then she began sweating too much. Then she began to stop sweating at all. They found shelter beneath the roots of a fallen tree as the light began to die. The extraction clearing was close now, maybe 3 kilometers. If Thomas was right, if the map could still be trusted, if distant measuring meant anything anymore. Anna sat with her back against the truck, breathing through the clenched teeth. Keller crouches down beside her. "Show me." She shook her head. "Anna?" She laughs. Small, bitter laugh. "You're not my doctor." "No, I'm worse." That almost made her smile. Then she rolls up her sleeve. The bite had sealed over. That was the first wrong thing. Not scabbed, not clotted, but sealed. The skin over her forearm was smooth and tight, almost polished. Beneath it, pale lava moved along blue lines of her veins, using circulation like a map. One reached her wrist and stopped. Anna watched it. Nobody breathed. Then a thin, green root pushed out beneath the skin, branching across the back of her hand. Her fingers curled. Mara shakes her head. "Don't say that." Anna looks at Keller. "They're not eating me. They're planting me." The skin along her arm darkened. Rough from wrist to elbow. Not bark, exactly. Something trying to become more human than bark, using the skin as a starting point. Her nails split. Underneath them, thin white fibers emerged, folding blindly for soil. Anna gasped and arched her back. Something was moving beneath her ribs. A spreading pressure. Her lungs began to rattle wetly. Keller reached for her, but then stopped. He could see the shape of tiny tendrils rising beneath the skin of her throat. She grabbed his shirt with her good hand. "Don't let me take root." The ground beneath her shifted. Half-thin roots pushed up through the mud around her hips, her boots, and her back. They did not grab violently. They explored. They touched her clothes, her skin, and the sealed bite. Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Please." Thomas lifted his machete. Mara shook her head violently. "No, no, no." Anna looks at Thomas. "Please." Thomas kneels in front of her. He touched her forehead gently, then he looked at Keller. "She is not asking you." Keller turns away before the machete came down. The sound was soft. Too soft. Afterward, no one spoke for a long time. The roots had grown towards Anna's body. It slowly withdrew into the soil. Not disappointment, but patient. By the final morning, only 3 of them reached the river. Keller, Mara, and Thomas. Mara no longer spoke to Keller unless she had to. Her camera was gone. Her microphone was gone. Her polished documentary voice was stripped away, leaving only breath, mud, and abject terror. Thomas led them without checking the map. Keller did not ask how he knew the way. Some knowledge was older than instruments. The river cut across their path less than a kilometer from the extraction clearing. It was narrow enough to cross, and that made Keller afraid. Because nothing had been easy since they entered the green. Thomas crouched at the bank and studied the water. It was brown, slow-moving, broken by roots and fallen branches. No ripples, no birds, no insects. And Mara whispers, "We can cross." Thomas shakes his head. "They are waiting where we need to go." Keller follows his gaze. At first he only sees logs. Then, on a log, one of them opens its eyes. Crocodiles were laying beneath the surface. Not many, but enough. Their backs were rigid with fungal plates. Their jaws were crowned with too many teeth, some growing through the gums at wrong angles. Green film clouded their eyes, but their heads turned as one when Keller shifted his weight. They did not blink. They did not drift. They waited. Mara steps back. "What do we do?" Thomas takes out his knife. "No." Keller knew before the guide moved. Thomas cut his palm. Blood welled instantly. Mara grabs his arm. "No, we find another way." "There is no other way." "You don't know that." Thomas looks at the forest behind them. The trees were full of movement. Spiders, snakes, winged insects, things half-born and already hungry. "Yes, I do," Thomas replies. He walks upstream, and the crocodiles follow the scent before the first drop of blood even hits the water. Keller tries to stop him, but Thomas shoves him back. "Run when I say." The guide cuts him off and smiles sadly. "I know it's the only way out now." The river erupts. Thomas threw himself sideways at the first crocodile's lunge. Its jaws snapped shut where his leg had been. He drove the knife into its eye, and dark fluid sprayed across his arm. Mara screamed. Keller grabs her and pulls her into the water. They crossed the river, and it tore itself behind them. Halfway across, Keller looks back. Thomas was still standing somehow. A crocodile had his left arm. Another had his leg. He hacked at them with the machete, blood streaming into the water, but then a root wrapped around his ankle from the bank. Not a root, a tendril, and it pulled. And the crocodiles pulled the other way. For one horrible moment, Thomas was held between the river and the forest, both claiming him. His body stretched, his shoulders twisted, his jaw clenched so hard Keller saw blood run from his mouth. The crocodile rolled, the tendrils tightened, something snapped beneath the water. Thomas did not scream. His eyes found Keller. No fear now, only warming. The water closed over him. Mara and Keller reached the far bank and crawled into the mud. Behind them, the river went still. Ahead, through the trees, they heard it. Rotor blades. The helicopter. Mara laughed, not because anything was funny, because hope, after all this horror, hope felt like madness. They ran. Branches tore at them. Insects rose from the ground. Something large moved parallel beneath the trees. The extraction clearing approached up ahead, Sunlight. Open sky. The helicopter descending was like salvation itself. Mara reached it first. She turned back towards Keller, and then stopped. Her expression changed. Keller followed her gaze, and on the edge of the clearing stood Leia, or what was left of her. Suspended between two trees, webbing stitched through her skin, camera light still glowing from somewhere inside the cocoon. Her mouth moved suddenly. Mara took one step towards her, but Keller, without a second thought, shouted no and grabbed her. Leia's mouth opened wider, but Benji's voice came out. "Help me!" Then Anna's. "Do not let me take root." Then Thomas. "Run when I say." Mara screamed and tried to pull free. The canopy behind Leia opened. Spiders dropped, snakes slid, winged insects rose in a black crowd. Keller dragged Mara towards the helicopter. The pilot now was shouting, "Move, move, move!" Mara reached the skid. Something wrapped her around her ankle, and she fell. Keller grabbed her hand, and for 1 second she held her, her fingers digging into her wrist. Her eyes locked onto his. "Don't let go." He tried. He truly tried, but another tendril tightened around her ankle, another wrapped around her wrist. Then something in the grass opened its jaws. Mara was pulled back so fast her nails tore lines down Keller's palm, and she vanished into the green. The helicopter lifted before Keller was fully inside. The pilot grabbed his vest and hauled him across the floor. Below them, the clearing filled with movement. Then the canopy folded shut, not like swaying trees, but like a wounded ceiling. For several minutes, Keller could not speak. He lay on the floor of the helicopter, shaking, covered in mud, blood, and greenish-black residue from the pipe. The pilot kept asking questions. How many survivors? Were there others behind him? Was he exposed to the chemicals? Had he been bitten? Keller heard those words. He understood them, but they seemed very far away. The helicopter rose above the canopy. The Amazon stretched beneath them, endless and green. From up here it looked peaceful. That was a cruelty of distance. So the pilot radios back to base. Extraction successful. 1 survivor recovered. Repeat, 1 survivor recovered. Returning to base. Keller closed his eyes. 1 survivor. Those words should have broken him. Instead, he felt something move under the skin of his arm. He opened his eyes. The cut and the bandage was gone. Not scabbed, but gone. In its place, green, black veins spread through the surface of his skin in delicate branching lines, like root. His fingernails now ached. He looked down and saw tiny, hooked ridges forming at the edges. His hearing sharpened. The rotor blades no longer sounded like machinery. They sounded like winds. The pilot's heartbeat thudded from the cockpit, slow, warm, full of salt and iron. Keller swallowed. The air conditioning hurt his lungs. Too cold, too dry. Beneath his shirt, something thin and root-like pressed against the inside of his ribs, reaching upwards every time he breathed. He pressed one hand against the helicopter window and looked down at the rainforest. For the first time since he landed, he did not feel watched. He felt remembered. The pilot glanced back. "Doctor, stay with me. You're safe now." Keller almost laughed. Safe? He thought of the workers in the trench. Benji's mouth full of wings. Rourke breaking under the snakes. Leia stitched into the canopy. Anna beginning to take root. Thomas held between the river and the forest. And Mara disappearing into the green. He thought of Project Verdant, the miracle compound, the acceptable deviations, the reports he had signed, the warnings he had softened, the data he had buried beneath better language. He had not healed anything. He had given the wound instructions. The pilot then asked again, "Doctor, were you bitten?" Keller looked at the veins beneath his skin. The pulse in time with something much larger than his heart. Something far below. Something green. Something breathing. He opened his mouth to answer. For a moment, no words came out. Only a soft, clicking noise. The pilot turned. "What was that?" Keller looked down at the canopy as it rolled beneath them. The jungle seemed to almost inhale. Inside his chest, something answered. Not a heartbeat, but a root taking hold. So the pilot responds, quieter now. "Doctor?" Keller smiles. Not because he was happy, not because he was still himself, but because at long last he understood what Project Verdant had really achieved. The Rainforest had learned machinery. Blood, radio signals, rescue patterns, human fear, human guilt, human need, and now it had learned how to escape. So what happened in tonight's story? At the center of the breathing green is Project Verdant, a human attempt to control the healing process of the rainforest. Dr. Keller believed he had created a cure, a compound that could repair damaged soil, reconnect systems, and accelerate recovery. But when the line erupted, the compound did not simply heal the jungle, it accelerated its ability to respond. That's why the creatures changed throughout the story. They are not random monsters. They are adaptations. The ants occupy bodies. The spiders build traps. The snakes learn restraint. The insects sabotage machinery. The roots convert flesh into habit. Piece by piece, the rainforest became less like a location and more like an immune system. And the immune system, the humans are not the heroes. They are not even the villains. They are simply identified to be broken down and reused. That is what makes Keller's ending so disturbing. He survives, but not because he wants to escape. He survives because the jungle found a use for him. He became a seed, a carrier, a way out. A horror is not that the jungle kills everyone. The horror is that it learns enough for them to leave. And by the time that Keller is inside that helicopter, the story is already over. But the world just did not know it yet. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. And always remember, keep an eye on that glitch, because sometimes the glitch is truth.